Hi everyone, you're listening to the Vialucci podcast, uncensored and completely unedited discussions about life and everything in it. We hope you enjoy the show.
Do you want to do an intro, Charles?
Nanu.
Who was that?
That was Mork, Robin Williams.
Mork and Mindy.
Yeah.
Was he an alien?
Yeah, he was an alien from the planet Orc.
What happened in the last episode? Did he go back?
I don't know. I think he sort of relocated to Santa Monica.
Oh, okay. was that 80s?
That was the 70s and 80s. It was actually, Mork was actually a character that was in Happy Days.
It was a backdoor
And
pilot.
essentially,
He
was in Happy Days, and Henry Winkler sort of met me, and essentially it became like, a bit like Boise in Only Fools and Horses. It was a character that basically became very popular because Robin Williams was like a comedian who was like this manic thing, and Mork and Mindy became this huge spin-off, a bit like George and Mildred from Man About the House. You know, like certain characters stand out.
But he wasn't literally Mork in Happy Days.
He was the alien. He was Mork the alien.
Yeah.
Mork was actually originally in Happy Days. Yeah. He was a character which was written in by Gary Marshall for Happy Days, and then he became very popular.
just turned up one day, and then they started going nanu and being really weird.
Oh, I didn't realise.
It's very odd.
All right, well, on to the movies.
Okay.
John, you're still one of the rising stars in movie reviews.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, it's great.
And so what are we going to be doing today?
Well, we're going to be talking about comedy and horror.
Yeah, Valentine's.
The kind of the lighter moments that's happened. Now, before we start, just to say, this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler situation, because a lot of the films that we're going to talk about, for me to talk about what we're going to talk about, I'll have to review it. So anybody who's listening who's not seen any of the movies, if the minute I enter a thing, just switch off and then watch it and come back.
What was the thing you were saying you can't say about Halloween Ends?
Well, no, with Halloween Ends, I saw it on Friday, and again, the problem is normally when you watch a film, you sort of set up the film. The problem is the opening pre-credit sequence actually sets it up nicely for everything else. And the truth is unless you watch that, there will be people who do a review, but it's such a clever opening.
Oh, right.
And it sets up everything else. So that's why I'm not saying too much.
What do you mean it sets everything out, the rest of the film?
It sets up an interesting take on the whole Halloween thing, which I think works really, really well.
The whole
film, and it's a very clever way to enter the saga. I mean, some people may disagree, but that's what I think. That's my opinion. That's my plug.
Hang on, what do you mean to enter the saga? It's not starting.
End.
Oh, end
the saga. I mean, not enter, end.
And does it end?
Well, it will leave it what you will. The last shot of the film will you'll be like, okay, it's.
But hang on, what was the last one called?
Halloween Kills.
Is that the one with Jamie Lee Curtis and the daughter?
Yeah. So this is the actual, this is the
but they blew him up that time, didn't they?
Well, Michael Myers does. What
is dead can never die.
Keeps coming back.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So you can't say they kill him at the end of this one.
Well, let's just watch.
Because I can't be bothered watching them anymore. What's the point? He's not dead anyway. So just.
Well, this is the horror saga.
Has there been any talk about a TV series like they could do now?
I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, I think Halloween fans, even the most seasoned ones like me, are actually kind of glad. We kind of are accepting the fact that it's over.
Right. Okay.
Although, knowing the way the producers work in Hollywood, it will print money. It's a license to print money, so people know. So
yeah.
It's happened with Friday the 13th, the final chapter. That made more money, and then they said, "Sod it, we'll make more."
But if you call it Halloween Ends, I mean, that's really quite total, isn't it? There's not much room to wiggle off.
Well, I think the fact that John Carpenter and Jamie Lee Curtis are executive producers, and I think they know. I mean, Carpenter basically he's in his 70s now, and I think he kind of came back to it because they liked what David Gordon Green did with it. And I like these movies because if you're a Halloween fan, you thought sorry, I'm not going to listen to reviews, but I genuinely think these three things are satisfying.
Okay. Right, so what we're going to do? Top 10? What was it?
It's not a top 10, but I just wanted to use them as points of reference. So I'm going to talk about the wonderfully comic moments.
Okay.
And I'm going to kick off with probably the best comedy horror film of recent years.
Hold on, let me think.
Of recent years?
Yeah.
Horror comedies of recent years. Anyone in the audience?
I've got a big one. I've got a big one in the 80s, and then there's a big one in the 90s.
Well, this is actually a more recent one.
Okay.
So
Go on.
All right, go for it.
it is Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Oh,
bloody
of course.
hell.
Yes.
Okay, so Tucker and Dale versus Evil is for me one of the wonderfully subversive, hilarious comedy films that actually taps into any key moments in the movie. So this is essentially the flip side of Deliverance. And it's a bunch of high school jocks who go into the woods. And at the outset of the film, they sort of see two hillbillies in a truck going round. And they're driving along and they stop off at a garage station. And I think Dale, who's the cuddly one, the bearded one, a bit like Charles.
Yeah.
Essentially, he's basically a very shy, insecure hillbilly, and they're off to build a house. They're off to build a house anyway. So basically, he's into pickled eggs and everything else.
Charles?
And essentially, these jocks pull up at the gas station, and he's decided to buy a scythe. So he stands outside with the scythe, and he wants to go and chat to this very gorgeous blonde, and says, do you fancy going out for a date? And of course, he's holding the thing anyway. But it gets even worse because the whole paranoia about hillbillies takes off in wonderful ways. So there's two wonderful moments here. The first one is Tucker is actually trying to use a chainsaw to go, and he's chopping a piece of wood, and there's a beehive underneath it. So basically, he chops the beehive off, and then of course he suddenly starts running manically towards them, and it looks like Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But the funniest moment ever has got to be the wood chipper scene.
Yeah.
So essentially, that two of the hillbillies decide that they want to attack Dale, who's basically trying to, and they basically the blonde woman's actually had an accident, and they've looked after him and they're taking care of her. So what happens is that she says, they're doing some gardening in there, and he says, maybe I can help you. So the girls, they're sort of, and they all think she's digging her own grave. So of course, what happens is there's wood chipper starts, and they're trying to go and try killing him. He sort of crouches down. The guy goes out and goes head first into the wood chipper. A police sheriff turns up, and they're pulling out the legs, and he goes, we didn't do this. And it just builds into this wonderfully psychotic thing. And, it's a very wonderful comedy mix. And if you're into your horror in a big way, but it's intelligent, it's funny, it's gory, it's hilarious. It got a great reaction at Fright Fest.
It's so underrated still, even though it's done a little bit better.
But my feeling is, and this is a wonderful bit of news, is that a Halloween film Trick or Treat is actually getting a theatrical release. It was on home video, but Warner Brothers are releasing it in a limited theatrical release this year. And it's an injustice because, thank God, it's going on the big screen, because it has to be seen on the big screen. It's the best Halloween film since Halloween. Trick or Treat. It's a series of 4 stories. It's got Brian Cox and a Paquin, and it sort of taps into the whole kind of Halloween spirit, and it's wonderful. It's about 83 minutes. But
who was the director for Tucker and Theo?
I'll try and remember. But
have they done anything since? Because it was very original.
I doubt it. But I mean, I'm sure they're probably busy working on something else will come out anyway. So that's my first choice. Next up is The Evil Dead 1 and 2.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Evil Dead 1?
Evil Dead 1 and 2. So 1982, 1986, introduced the immortal character of Ash, played by Bruce Campbell. Bunch of youths go off to the woods, and they discover a tape recorder which happens to have an evil chant that summons evil spirits from the woods. It's got the infamous rape sequence, and that is a horrible scene. That's the thing. But the truth is, it's the actual humor. When the zombies transform into the zombies, it just sort of elevates into the rather incredibly gory moments. So, and it's all fresh faced, and then eventually each of the women go one after the other. So there's one scene where they push one of the zombified things into the fire, and she goes and gets pulled out. He goes, I don't know what I would have done with you if you had not pulled me from those hot coals, and then gets stabbed with a pencil. But it's like the extremity of the gore that's actually, I think, what makes it. So at the very end, when they sort of throw the actual Book of the Dead into there, there's a scene where they all start disintegrating.
This is the first one.
This is the very first one. And this corpse is standing up like crazy, and it goes down and then literally smashes, and then blood hits into the face. And it's a very wonderful old school horror film, because they had cameras on planks to mimic the woods. The tree rape sequence is actually a very clever thing, because you're just wondering how they did that, because when the woman gets in there like that. So moving on, it's Evil Dead 2 essentially is basically a comedy version of the original. So again, it's the first 10 minutes of the first 5 or 6 minutes is actually a reboot of the actual thing, and then Ash is then in the woods on his own, and essentially a relative of the professor they all turn up, and there's a very funny comedy moment where when the zombie is actually in the basement, the head is trapped in the trap door, and he basically whack it, and then the eyeball pops out and flies into the thing like that. Yep. But the other funny moment is the possessed hand.
Yeah. Which is genius.
Which is genius. So essentially at one point the hand is like this. So of course the hand is suddenly possessed, and then Ash goes, "You bastards, give me back my hand." And then of course it gets into a scene where he's in the kitchen and he's literally sort of being bashed in his head, and it's whacking him.
He's fighting his own hand.
Fighting his own hand. And then essentially, he's being bashed with. And then of course at one point he's on the floor, and essentially the hand is trying to crawl away like Thing in the Addams Family. Anyway, Ash sort of chops it off and he goes, "Who's laughing now?" And he sticks it into a bloody under a bucket, and then sticks Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms on the top. But it's the great thing is that the cheerful, Army of Darkness, which is the third one, which is essentially takes him into the medieval thing, which is kind of stop motion, and it's fun, but it's not Evil Dead. It's kind of more friendly, and there's lack of gore, but it's actually
it's very different. The first film is a almost straight up sort of horror film. The second one is a comedy version of that, a straight up comedy version. The third film just kind of goes bananas and just ends up having huge battles with skeletons.
It's like Harryhausen's Jason and the Argonauts. Yeah. It's like that kind of thing. So, but I think it has a place in my heart, because I like the fact that this is where the comedy and gore work really well. So that's the first.
Well, even the physical comedy of that scene is very good, considering he's not. Who is he really at that point?
He does flips. The bit where he grabs himself and starts doing flips, starts throwing himself. It's incredible.
And there's also the earlier scene where his girlfriend, he chops off the girl's head, and then essentially the girl sort of is in the vase, and he goes, "You," and the wonderful gory thing anyway. And then at one point he's
"You're going down."
And there's the other one where he's speaking to himself in the mirror. And then he's sort of going, he goes, "You chopped her up with the chainsaw." And then the next thing he's actually he's like this with his then going, "Ah," and he's in the chair like going, "Ah."
He just starts screaming.
How did they do that scene where he's in the mirror?
Oh, it's him. It's a hole in the wall.
Right.
And Bruce Campbell's through the hole. Yeah. And it's a double. The back of the head.
The fake bloke.
Yeah. So the real guy is there, and it's
well done.
It's really well done. That's what I'm saying.
The time,
the directorial techniques. It did have a bigger budget than you think. I think for the time.
But the thing is, the original Evil Dead was actually expansion of a short called Within the Woods, which essentially was a 35-minute short. And what it is essentially it's all the beats of the film. So the same thing with the hand, when the hand is the aerial shot of the hand being grabbed, and he grabs it when he's coming into the house. So this was actually a showcase so that they could prove to investors that they could make a film. Oh. Evil Dead 2 basically was not a big hit in America. It actually became big in Europe. Now, it's the most successful video rental of 1983 in the UK. Palace Pictures actually... It actually was controversial at the time because it was one of the first simultaneous film and video releases. Because it was actually, what it was it was released in February. On the early posters, which are designed by Graham Humphreys, who's done things like Nightmare on Elm Street, it says available on video. Now, the film industry in this country went ballistic because they thought this was going to be a danger to it. it's one of those. It was also controversial because it was a video nasty. You know, it was one of the pre-VRA titles.
It had quite a bad reputation.
It had a bad reputation for notoriety at the time. So they had a court case where it was declared that it was not obscene. So about 1990, it sort of became, you know, it was released with cuts, I think, at some point. And then essentially it's been eventually released, you know. And I think Sony now own the rights to it. So they've done this brand new Blu-ray version of it. So it's quite weird how a movie with reputation evolves, and that's what it does. So
the second one they've done the Blu-ray of.
Yeah, I think, but again, with Evil Dead 2, I mean, Sam Raimi just like with The Road Warrior with George Miller and Mad Max 2, he wanted to make a bigger version of the first film. So he had more liberty, and then of course it sort of led to Darkman, and it led to Spider-Man, and he did a film in 1985 called Crime Wave, which was actually a noir film, which kind of was here and there, but also The Evil Dead was also the first film in which Joel and Ethan Coen worked as an editor. So the Coen brothers actually came out of that movie. But it sort of is, you know, for the VHS generation like myself, it is one of the defining moments of our video viewing things. You know,
have you got a VCR still?
No,
any tapes? Have they just gone?
No, I mean,
thought you might have a few sort of.
I had a few at the time, but again, it was all rentals, because the wonderful thing about the VHS era, and this is what people don't understand, is that although the video nasties are a big thing of it, there's a lot of valid films that are, you know, legitimate things like, you know, Thorny and Mine, Warner Home Video released things like The Wild Bunch and, you know, The Deer Hunter and The Lord of the Rings. And, you know, there's actually on YouTube, if you search Thorny and Mine trailers, there's actually a whole bunch of compilation trailers from the time, these ads from 1980. And
I loved all the trailers used to get like when, at the beginning of the VCRs, like you see all these cool trailers. Like you never really got to see many trailers except in the cinema, but occasionally on telly.
But the actual thing is that was one of the joys of it, because a lot of the people who sort of had the rights for these VHSs didn't know what they actually had. You know, there were times where, you know, I remember watching Kingdom of the Spiders, and, you know, I remember fast forwarding through the rest of the tape because it was an hour and 40 minutes, but it was a 3-hour tape thing. Is there anything else on there? And I remember watching the very first thing we watched, which was 40 years ago this month, was The Hills of Eyes, which was World of Video 2000, the Wes Craven thing. But again, I remember sort of watching that, and at the end of it, they had a couple of trailers for a thing called Human Experiments and Don't Answer the Phone. Which is this
trailer.
They're trailers, and
is that at the end?
At the end of after the film finished, they put trailers on. But sometimes in some of the movies, like, you know, in some of the early Universal stuff, CIC stuff, there were about 4 or 5 trailers before the thing. And so anyway, that's my second choice.
Hang on, good to go back to that. But I didn't know trailers were at the end of films. Was that
there was sometimes they did have trailers. Sometimes on some tapes they said, please stay to the end of the tape because we got some exclusive previews of some brand new titles.
Don't remember seeing that.
No, they did.
Maybe I didn't hang on to the end.
No, they did. On Friday the 13th, Part 2, one of the VHS, it goes, stick around for an exclusive preview of Friday the 13th, Part 3.
Oh, no.
And at the end of the tape, they had the original trailer for Friday the 13th, Part 3. Okay. So my next choice is Beetlejuice.
Okay.
Well,
which is the Tim Burton movie. Now, again, this
mid-80s.
This is 1988. This is actually, I wouldn't say it's conventionally horror, but it is in a way a horror comedy because, again, the plot of this is Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis have just bought a house in a very nice suburban neighborhood, and they're killed in a car crash. And what happens is they come back to the house, but of course they're in the afterlife. And then this rather despicable family, Jeffrey Jones, Catherine O'Hara, and Winona Ryder, who plays the rather morose teenager who's
the original emo.
The original emo. They're actually, Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin don't like the fact that these people have taken over their house. And these people actually are okay with the scares and stuff. So they decide to summon this ghostess with the mostest called Beetlejuice. And a bit like Candyman, you have to take 3 things: Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. And then essentially they come up with all these plans, and it still doesn't work. So it leads to a very funny moment where they're having a dinner party to the Banana Boat song. So they're all going around and goes, hey, and they're all singing.
So the ghosts make them sing.
They make sing. So it's a day. They goes, they like come and we want to go home. And it's just very fun. But then it escalates because Michael Keaton has one of the funniest moments because he goes, we need to get you out. He goes, yeah, but the problem is if I get called out all these times, I'll be doing talk shows and stuff like that. And then it just escalates into kind of a Gilliam-esque type climax like Time Bandits. You know, Michael Keaton's thing sort of happens in a big way. And then, but it was the film that actually sort of gave Tim Burton his reputation because he'd done Pee-wee's Big Adventure with Paul Rubens for Pee-wee. But this was the movie that kind of, it's a very playful film. Then it led to Batman, and then his Edward Scissorhands and stuff because it was his.
It sort of set his style a bit as well.
Yeah.
That was him. That was him. Sort of.
Yeah, but that was the wonderful thing. It's one of the most interesting fusions of comedy and horror. It's a family horror film.
Yeah.
And so that's
and for a mainstream film, it's a real oddity, I think.
Yeah.
But it's such a left field thing because at the time when you think of what was out there in 1988, and when we had like Twins, we had Die Hard, we had Midnight Run, stuff like that. So it was coming to America. It was kind of a left field entry that I think this is the wonderful thing. On occasions, a movie will hit the right notes and stuff. So that's my third choice. My fourth choice is Gremlins.
Yes.
Which is
how many did they end up making?
They've made 2
so far.
So far.
Gremlins
and Gremlins 2: The New Batch. I prefer the sequel, although everybody thinks I'm sacrilegious. I don't care. I think it's a bigger thing. I love it.
I have to say, I like the first film a lot. I think the second one is just again. It's like Evil Dead 1 and 2.
Yeah,
like, Evil Dead 1's a great film. I think Evil Dead 2 just goes nuts with the concept.
And at one point, there's a film break, and then it turns out that the Gremlin appears on because they've actually mentioned it. So this was Joe Dante, and it was a Steven Spielberg production. It's kind of divided audiences over the years because, again, it was released and it was a very odd mix of horror and humor, and it was a cuddly film because it's a Spielberg film. Again, it was around the same time that the PG-13 was coming into in its own.
I forgot it was Spielberg.
It was so again, Joe Dante had done The Howling. And again, it sort of divides people because at the time, you had in Christmas '84, you had the Ghostbusters camp and you had the Gremlins camp. Gremlins was given a 15 in the UK, so it restricted it. Although a lot of the time, the promotion was based around cuddly toys, and kids thought, "Oh, could we go and see it?" Of course, they couldn't because it was a restricted category. Ghostbusters actually won the day that day. Although that's kind of gone up in maturity. I think it's gone from a PG to a 12A. Because of some of the things in that movie.
Ghostbusters is scary. I don't know if it's on your list.
Oh yeah, no,
it's
no.
Is legit scary.
Let's tap into that because the interesting thing is one of the shocking moments in that film is actually when the ghost decides to give Dan Aykroyd fellatio.
Yes.
So there's a scene where there's a dream.
There's
a dream sequence where basically Dan Aykroyd's on the bed and he's sort of looking up, and this apparition appears, and then all of a sudden his trousers are pulled down.
His belt gets undone.
And then all of a sudden you see his eyes cross. And it was a very funny sequence in the cinema. I mean, everybody, it's the standout moment in it. But of course, when you look at it again, you're thinking, is this a kid's film?
It is a very strange. And,
it was the 80s.
It's one of those things. You're like, yeah, okay, haha. But then actually, upon thinking, you're like, wait, how does it? And also the physics of it.
Right, yeah.
But it's a great fusion of visual effects because it's the wonderful thing. It's a wonderful moment because again, it's sort of when their things are going off and stuff, and then you have things like Gozer. I mean, the sequence in the library when they discover at the New York Public Library, and then it sort of switches a bit like. Like the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the apparitions at the end of Raiders, and they transform into things and runs out. But this is an interesting thing about the line of, humor and horror that works really well. And it works quite, in Gremlins, for example, you have the gremlin in a blender. You have the fact that they don't heed the morals of the Chinese guy. They buy this pet, don't feed him after midnight. And then, of course, they've, the Gremlins have actually sort of turned off the alarm, and he said, it says 8 o'clock. And of course, it's realized it's after midnight. And then it sort of erupts into there like that. I mean, it's actually referenced in The Hangover by Bradley Cooper about Zach Galifianakis. He goes, he's like a gremlin, you know, he's all these rules.
Oh, right.
But with Gremlins, it's such a unique film because, you know, the actual place where it takes place is the same square they use is actually used in Back to the Future. So the same square, it's actually used in the same thing. So, and, you know, it's kind of got references to It's a Wonderful Life. And, you know, Zach Galligan, who did come over for a few screenings and did a Q&A at these screenings at the Prince Charles. He's nice guy. But it's sort of, you know, it's a very dark movie, you know, because you're never quite sure how to categorize it. Is it a kid's film about cute animals, or is it an adult film about, you know, where horrible things, and it's a moral tale?
Again, because it has the trappings of a Christmas film, of a sort of family film, of and it has cute monsters, and it's a bit zany, and when the gremlins get bad and stuff, it's still a bit wacky, you know what I mean, like in tone. But yes, there is. It's again. I remember watching it when I was a kid, and it was scary. Like I was just like, "Oh, this is quite great. It's quite graphic." You know what I mean? It's quite surprised.
And the other thing as well is, it's like when the gremlins are sort of transforming. There's actually a moment where they're a bit like the eggs in Alien, the alien chamber. You know, and you see these weird things where it
goes up to the roof, or something.
It's something like that. But there's like the thing where they're in the bar, for example. You know, that they have that whole sequence where they're running rampant in the theater and stuff. But it sort of divides people, because I think people get really, it's an odd one.
I don't know. There's two, the last two, again, they're really odd films. I don't know if they're the type of thing I think you'd struggle to get made now, if you were coming up with this concept now, because I think that people would say, well, where's the audience? Who's this appealing?
Well, there's less cocaine around amongst directors now.
But that said, the thing about it is because you had Spielberg, who kind of was tapping into it, because he had a very dark, you know, he was coming off the coattails of E.T. and E.T., you know, if you make the most successful film of all time at the time, you know, you've got a lot more power. It's like James Cameron, you know, he's about to release the next Avatar movie. And again, if you have, you know, because the bottom line is box office. And again, it was a hugely successful film in 1984. It actually hit the UK top 10 in 1985, but again, Ghostbusters sort of, they were critics saying, oh, well, they're going to lose a packet because it's a 15 and stuff like that. I think it's a 12 now. I think Gremlins has sort of been categorized down to 12.
Did the second one come out as a 15?
Second one was a 12. I think.
It must have dropped down to get the money.
But the thing is that second one's actually a lot more cute. It's more fun, and you know when they go in the office, because it's actually John Glover who actually plays this Trump-esque thing, because it's a Trump Tower thing, clamp and so and it just these movies, when they work,
when I saw I can remember one of them with the lipstick on, and like it was like a dress. I was like, oh no,
Lady Gremlin, yeah.
But she was smoking a cigarette.
Yeah, but I love it. They cut to them and they're all wearing suits and they go, buy, sell.
Yeah, oh no.
So that is my fourth choice. Now I cannot do a list of comedy and horror without including, but of course, American Werewolf in London.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, nice.
So this again was a bit of history about this. This was actually written by John Landis when he worked on Kelly's Heroes, and basically,
what film is this? 70s.
It's American Werewolf in London, 1981.
Oh, 81, okay.
And essentially, John Landis was a flunky on a film called Kelly's Heroes with Clint Eastwood. And how it worked was a lot of people, basically John Landis was treated like shit by the people on Kelly's Heroes. But there was a stunt guy called Alf Joint who worked on things like Superman and stuff, and Vic Armstrong was his one protege. Vic Armstrong, of course, is one of the most famous stuntmen in the world. He's done second unit on Total Recall, and he actually doubled for Harrison Ford and actually saved Temple of Doom because Harrison Ford injured his back, and a lot of the action is actually done as Vic Armstrong doubling.
Okay.
So Alf Joint was treated John Landis with respect, and then when he got round to making American Werewolf in London, he then made the movie. So this is about two backpackers David Norton and Griffin Dunne, who are walking through the Yorkshire moors.
Are they Canadians? Are they?
They're Americans.
Oh, Americans. Okay.
And they stop off at a pub called the Slaughtered Lamb. And of course, they walk in there, and
It's the classic everything stops.
so they stop
yeah.
And then, of course, he says, and then there's like a evil cross on the wall and stuff. So, cut long story short, they're sort of walking through the woods. One of them, Griffin Dunne, is attacked by a werewolf. David Norton ends up in a hospital in London. And essentially, he starts having these paranoid dreams. One of my favorite scares in this film is actually when he's sitting at home with his family, and the door knocks, and all these mutant zombies sort of
Nazi zombies,
Nazi zombies, and then his throat gets slashed, and then Jenny Agutter, who plays the nurse who nurses his back, and he goes, "I got something for," and then she opens the curtain, and the guy's in there snapping him like that. And then he starts, and then Griffin Dunne, who basically is increasingly disintegrating, says to me,
falling apart.
You're turning into...
his dead mates.
You're going to turn into a wolf. And then, of course, we have the famous on-screen transformation.
One of the best still today.
Again, it's one of those things you watch and you're like, I watch it recently. I just watched that clip recently for some reason.
Yeah, still holds up.
I was still like, how the hell did they do that? It looks incredible.
But it also has the thing when the very first time he wakes up and he's just returned to normal, he's actually sort of walking around, and of course he's totally naked, and he says to this kid, "Hey kid, can I have your balloons?" And he goes, I'll treat you. He goes, "I don't want the balloons." So of course, there's this quick shot of him running across frame where he's sort of got nothing but the balloons, and then he does it. And then it sort of does that. And then, of course, the climax in Piccadilly Circus, which was shot over 2 nights, and they actually sort of planned it. And they actually shot it. And then within half an hour, they'd reopen the room. So the actual bus driver who in the car, when the bus driver crashes, that's actually Vic Armstrong in the thing. So they actually planned it up at I think it must have been Pinewood, planned everything coordinately, put everything together, then filmed these other 2 things, had people ready to clear up all the glass, and it was working again. It was phenomenal. They only had 2 nights to shoot it.
Yeah, because a lot of cars on the sides and things in Piccadilly Square.
Yeah. Because that's the thing about it. When you look at when the logistics of shooting in London, it's like, well, how can you do
Piccadilly Square in the centre of
Circus.
Circus, yeah.
So it's for me, it's one of the most wonderful blends of horror and comedy, because it's playful, and I think that's one of the rules of these horror films, is that you have to be playful with the audience, what they're going to do and stuff like that, and it also has great horror and stuff like that, and it's probably one of the most humorous things, because and what's also refreshing is that the wonderful thing is it's not Hollywood England. John Landis very wisely uses British actors in British situations. So when they're going across the Slaughtered Lamb, it's not like some studio, like a rendition of an English village in California, which is what they did The Adventures of Robin Hood. That's all shot in the California forest and stuff like that. It's genuinely in England. And you have actors, Jenny Agutter, you have John Glover, you have, a whole variety of things. And it's just done... and that's what I like about it, is the fact that it's a British, they've done it in a very British way.
And they did film at London Zoo, didn't they? Isn't that where he wakes up in London Zoo? Yeah.
So that's my 5th one. I'm going to bring in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1 and 2.
As a comedy?
Yep. They're both comedies in a way. They're very dark comedies, because...
The sequel, certainly.
Yeah.
Yes,
but the original, interestingly enough, if you watch it again, there's actually very interestingly, very funny, dark moments of humour. This is why I think it works well, because it's basically a family of brothers who are basically, because of progression, are actually put out of business because they worked in a slaughterhouse.
Right.
So they dealt with meat and cattle, and then then the thing got closed down, and now they sort of have humans for meat.
Right. Okay.
So when you first see it, you think, okay, this is quite a dark thing. It's quite it's quite intense and stuff.
Yeah, I haven't seen it for a long time, so you're gonna have to remind me. So go on.
Oh, so in a nutshell, it's based on the legend of Ed Gein. And it sort of plays out. So there's a date, August the 18th, 1973, and then they goes, it's all the more tragic that they were young. So it's 5 youths in a camper van who basically are driving around, and they're off to visit their old house. And they break down and run out of gas. And then basically two of them break off and go off to this house because they want to get some gas for their vehicle. They meet Leatherface. One of them gets hit with a sledgehammer. The second one gets impaled on the meat hook. A third one goes off to look for him, gets bloody hit again. He gets put down, and he's done like that, which leaves Sally, Marilyn Burns, and Paul Pottain, the wheelchair-bound Franklin, and of course they go off into the woods, and Leatherface kills the wheelchair hitchhiker, and then essentially it's the final girl, which is thing.
So it's a fella in the wheelchair, isn't it?
Yeah, fella in the wheelchair.
Okay.
Why I want to tap into the humor is the funny thing is they basically tie up Marilyn Burns, and she's actually terrorized, but it's actually like a dinner.
The dinner party scene is
I can remember them sitting around, yeah.
And
there's
there's a wonderful moment where when Sally is being chased, Leatherface he actually chops the door, and then the Jim Sider, who's the pup, who's basically the big brother, he says to me, "You fool, you ruined the door." and again it's like there's another thing as the climax of the film, when she escapes and she's being chased by the hitchhiker, there's a sequence where this black trucker comes out, and of course the funny thing is he comes in and of course he's sort of just got out there, and then Sally's come toward and Leatherface comes around with, and he sort of, and what I've noticed at the audience is they all crawl back into the truck, and everybody's laughing because it's also when Sally's being chased and walking around, it's like the whole thing is that everybody's laughing at Leatherface. And now you're not meant to, because, for God's sake, 5 people have been dead rather viciously. I mean, it was rejected by the BBFC in 1975, and for 25 years it wasn't available. But there is intense moments of humor. And that's the thing, is that some people, if you're not a horror fan, if you can get beyond the gore, you'll see moments of humor, because it's actually about families. It's about family tension. Which is what these movies are. In the second film, again, it's more ridiculous because, again, they're now driving a rolling Roundup gun, and they're winning competitions for their award-winning chili, even though they've admitted that they're saying, got prime cuts of meat. Well, it's the meat. And, but it's also got a very ridiculous scene where Leatherface is sort of taunting Stretch, played by Caroline Williams, and he goes, and she's going, "How good are you?" And she's sort of doing, and of course he suddenly gets
Hang on, say that again. So the Leatherface is what?
So Leatherface has a crush on this DJ. So I'll go back and I'll explain the plot of Chainsaw Massacre. Yeah. So at the beginning of the film, there's 2 jocks who are riding around, and they're taunting this truck.
Yeah.
Which turns out to be driven by Leatherface and his brother. Right. And Stretch is actually having a phone call with him. Stretch is the DJ, played by Caroline Williams. She's brought up
the DJ.
There's a DJ.
There's a radio
station. There's a radio station.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she actually records the last moments of these 2 jocks being killed on the road. And Dennis Hopper, who plays Lefty Emright, who happens to be a relative of Sally and Franklin from the first film, has been pursuing relentlessly the Leatherface family for years. And he says to Stretch, "I want you to play the recording on live." And then Leatherface and his brother Chop Top turn up at the radio station and run havoc. Oh, okay. They then go back, and they've got this theme park called Namland, which is like an underground thing, which is a wonderfully designed thing. But it's a more ridiculous film, because you then got Dennis Hopper, who has 2 chainsaws, like pistols, and he's actually going to a chainsaw store, and he's going like this, and he's he's treating them like guns and stuff. And it's
double chainsaws.
Right. Double chainsaw. So it sort of climaxes, and there's a huge chainsaw battle between Dennis Hopper and
I haven't seen it. I just realized I haven't seen it.
It's bonkers. Right. Yeah.
But it's actually one of the best horror sequels I've seen, and I think it's more extreme than the first film, because the gore which is done by Tom Savini. I mean, it went out and rated in the United States, and again, it was unavailable in the UK for 15 years. It never got a release until 2001.
So they didn't tone it down to try and get a rating.
It's not that bad or intense. If you're a genuine horror fan, it's not that bad or intense an experience. I think the problem is if you don't like gore, you're not going to like it. It's a horror film, for God's sake. You've got to enjoy it. So the extremity, and I'm kind of fascinated. And with Tom Savini, who's done legendary stuff with George A. Romero and Friday the 13th and Rosemary's Killer, aka The Prowler. He's a legend, but the wonderful thing is the gore. What's interesting is that less gore actually makes it much more shocking than actually more gore. If you think about it. So if you take, let's go sideways is in The Omen. It's like the scene where Lee Remick is actually thrown over the banister and she falls to the ground. The most disturbing moment in that is actually a close-up of her face and you see blood dripping. That's more kind of uncomfortable to me than it is in The Evil Dead, where they go big on the gore, because it's much more psychological. It's more suggestion. So that's the thing. That's what I think is the interesting thing, is that when you have people being pulled apart in a thing, you can't really take it as seriously, because you kind of know it's all prosthetics. If you take The Thing, for example, what makes the spider thing work so well, it's not the spider thing business. It's actually David Clennan's reaction when the thing's crawling along and he goes, "You've got to be fucking kidding." Because that's
the audience's response.
Because the funny thing about that sequence is, The Thing has some incredible moments. I think the first thing with the dog transformation, when they discover when Bennings gets transformed, and the gore, the actual bits are falling along on the ground and he's been taken over and he's on the chair and he's being consumed. But the spider thing moment is actually the wonderful thing is Rob Bottin's way, and I watched the making of it and how he used that. He used a lot of interesting things like, there was a lot of, to get that thing of the thing pulling away from the body. There was like, he used this kind of interesting prosthetic stuff. But again, when the thing sort of expands and then it's in the background in the fading and it's crawling along, you're looking at it, and then David Clem goes, "You've got to be fucking kidding." And everybody laughs at that moment, because again, that's where the balance happens. It's sort of offset with great bits of humor, and then you're back into the thing, and then you think, right, that we can have a bit of relief, but then you're getting back into the next intensity anyway.
And that's the thing. That's the thing we sort of set up and pay off, is that like comedy comes from tension. And so it's not that dissimilar from of a horror movie, suspense and the scare and the sort of and the release of sort of and the release of a laugh, So they sort of is overlap in the mechanics of how that works. Yeah.
So what have we got next?
Okay, so next is it's slightly different, but it is in a way, it's more of a dark horror comedy, but I do think it has moments of mince, and it's Heathers.
Okay,
right, I haven't seen it, so go on.
So Heathers is a very dark high school satire.
It's 90s.
It's 1988.
Yeah.
And it's actually Christian Slater and Winona Ryder.
Yeah.
So it's set in a school called Westerberg, Ohio. And
where's Heathers come into it?
You're not in a minute. Okay, so Winona Ryder is Veronica Sawyer, and she actually falls in with three Heathers. Heather Duke, Heather Chandler, and Heather McNamara, played by the late Kim Walker, Lizanne Falk, and Shannon Doherty, who was in Beverly Hills 90210. So essentially, it's your typical high school thing, and essentially, they're having like the Heathers are going around, the cool girls,
the mean girl.
It's a forerunner of Mean Girls.
Yeah.
So essentially, they're going around, and then of course, Christian Slater's just arrived, and he's Jason Dean, JD, and he's sort of sitting in the cafeteria, just minding his own business. And there's a couple of jocks, Kurt and Ram, who basically go up and he goes, "Let's kick his ass." And he goes up to, they go and he goes, "Answer him, Dick." And he goes, "Did they have a no fags allowed policy?" And then Christian says, "Yeah, but they do have an open door policy for assholes." And he goes, "What do you say, Dick?" And he goes, and then he pulls out a gun with blanks. But the dark comedy comes from the fact that Heather Chandler takes Veronica Sawyer to a party, and there's a bit of an argument. And then basically Veronica has a desire to actually, sort of do something bad, wants Heather Chandler to puke her guts out. Unfortunately, Christian Slater puts some drain cleaner in he puts out a thing called, I think it's milk and orange juice or something like, or soup. And then basically she picks up the wrong cup and Heather Chandler drinks it, and basically she dies. She sort of goes down.
Why does he put drain cleaner?
Because he's a psycho. He wants he's basically his father and him who basically have a desire. They want to blow stuff up.
They're nutters.
Kill stuff. So of course, Christian Slater says, you can fake Heather Chandler's, and starts making suicide notes. So everybody starts doing it, and then it sort of escalates, and she Veronica sort of starts playing along. So it's a bit like Bonnie and Clyde. They're kind of, it's kind of got a 50s kind of James Dean Rebel Without a Cause sensitivity about it, but it's a satire about...
Crossed with the Breakfast Club.
Crossed with the Breakfast Club.
Yeah, I thought we had that.
But it actually, again, it's kind of the antithesis of the John Hughes thing at the time, because this was a time when you had like the John Hughes, the Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, some kind of wonderful...
16 Candles.
16 Candles. And this was quite vapid because that's not the reality of high school. It certainly wasn't, I was a very... I didn't really enjoy school anyway, but again, that's the reality of it. This kind of people going to the prom and, and you all look great and the kids look great and, we're all going to live happily ever after.
And you're all confident and like not riddled with self-doubt.
Yeah.
But it's more about, it's got very sensitive things. It actually is more relevant today, post-Columbine, and also with the issue of Sandy Hook and stuff. Yeah. It actually taps into like the feelings of mental health. It taps into the idea of it deals with like taunting the obese kid and stuff like that.
Although it's not a film about school shooters, because there isn't a school shooting in it, but they do blow it up.
Because basically Christian Slater, like what they do is like Kurt and Ram basically taunt. They went to a field to tap cows, like him and Heather Duke. And essentially, one of the jocks sort of starts spreading a vicious rumor around about Veronica, saying that I had it off with you in the field. And then basically him and Christian Slater she lures Kurt and Ram to a field, and basically Christian Slater shoots him. And she's got these Ick Luger bullets, and of course they're real bullets. And so it sort of escalates in a way. And then basically they're sort of in there with at the funeral. He says, my son's a homosexual. My son's... So again, it's also discomforting because today, for example, homophobia and all this other stuff, you have to go into it with a kind of balanced sensitivity, and you've got to remember it was made at a different time.
Yeah.
You couldn't make a film like Heathers today because that's the whole uniqueness of it, is the fact that it was made at a certain time and it still has relevance. But you've got to be mindful today.
Got to be wise.
You've got to kind of think, because today, for example, we're in a woke and cancel culture thing, and like for example, if you have, it's like anything. If you made a high school satire about black kids and stuff like that, but you'd also have to make sure that it would have to be black writers who can sort of tell that language and say that language, and you'd have to work at it, and you'd also be mindful of it. With LGBTQ, for example, and trans and all this other stuff, it's not an easy thing to do.
Well, a film can be about homophobia or racism or any of these negative things without necessarily being like, a film could be about racism, but not necessarily racist film.
Yeah, but it's a delicate balance. You have to be sure, and I think this is why with a film like Heathers, which is why I brought it up, although it's a high school thing, it does deal with very dark moments, and it's a comedy and horror. The horror is actually the psychology. The horror is actually people dying.
Yeah.
Winona Ryder said the problem is people think that suicide is cool. That's not what it's about. It's the actual, because if you delve into it, people start talking about it, and that might be something that touches off a spark to actually cause you to do the dirty deed. But it's a very honourable film. But I think you have to remember that, again, it was a very daring film. I think it's a very interesting film for people to watch anyway. So,
right. So what's the next one?
Well, we're going to talk a bit about Halloween, the original, because that does have fun moments of humour in it. I mean, I can't
remember it. Go on. What would be the
So there's basically Tommy Doyle. There's basically two kids, Tommy and Lindsay. I mean, Kyle Richards, who plays Lindsay Wallace, the young girl, she's actually in the new Halloween as a bartender, and she's nice. She's nice, but she was a cute kid at the time. So there's essentially what it is. There's moments in the film where Nancy Loomis, who plays Annie, she's basically just been off by Michael Myers, and essentially they're watching the monster. They're watching Forbidden Planet, all the thing. I mean, Laurie Strode is babysitting the two kids. So the two kids are watching. Anyway, Tommy Doyle gets up and goes to the curtain, with the intention of scaring Lindsay. And then, of course, he's looking out the window and Michael Myers is carrying the body of Annie around. So, of course, Lindsay comes out and all of a sudden he gets scared and he goes, ah! And the other one is, there's another very funny moment near the beginning where just after Michael Myers has escaped from the penitentiary and he's sort of going after him, he goes, and there's a very funny, he goes, and the doc, there's a fellow doctor saying to Donald Pleasence, he goes, Haddonfield's 150 miles from here. He goes, he doesn't even know how to drive. He's doing very well last night. Maybe somebody gave him lessons. And then there's another funny moment where they have the old Myers house where all the dirty deeds, and there are kids who are going up to, Lonnie and some friends are going up. And then Donald Pleasence is actually standing in the grounds. And of course he's gone up to him and he goes, Lonnie, get your ass away from there. And then the sheriff sort of taps Donald Pleasence on the back. So there's kind of a double red herring. But it's also the fact that the fun of it is about the boogeyman and there are really nice, interest. I mean, it's a scary film, but there are moments of humor in the film that I think work really well. And again, you see that in, things like Nightmare on Elm. I mean, Nightmare on Elm Street has some very funny moments in there. So at the very beginning, you have, where they're sort of meeting up. There's that very funny moment where Johnny Depp is sort of having a phone call, and of course he puts the sound effects thing on, and of course he goes, "There's a big bat and there's screams and stuff." He goes, "We're over by the airport." And it's those tapes of sound effects, and of course he can't play it and stuff like that. But again, the later Freddy films were actually much more fun, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, for example, you had the moment the person who loved television, she goes, "It's your big break," and the TV grabs and whacks you in the head. And then, but Freddy became a caricature of a scary character. He didn't have the relentlessness of it. It was always done with humor. So from part 3 to part 5 onwards, they were all very much the humor of them was more about the humor, and you kind of were
as the villain took a bigger role as well. You know what I mean? Because that's the thing is with a lot of them, like your Jason Voorhees, not a lot to work with there, to be honest. But like as people really liked Freddy, so like they would so he basically became the star.
Yeah. So what's the next one?
Well, we're going to talk about another Carpenter one because again, I do like the playfulness of this one, and that is The Fog.
Oh yeah,
the John Carpenter version, which
not necessarily. I would think.
Again, I can't remember the humor in
comedy.
But there are some. There's one or two very funny moments of humor in it. So, for example, at the very beginning of the film, there's basically Father Malone, played by Hal Holbrook. He's sort of sitting in his office in the church, and John Carpenter, in a rare cameo as Bennett comes in, he goes, "Father, I'm done now." He goes, "Bennett, thank you for coming. Father, can I get," he goes, "Mate, I want you to come in could you come in at 4 tomorrow?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Father, can I get paid?" He goes, "Maybe you should come in at 6. So, but the actual thing is my other favorite moment in that is actually there's a lot of fun moments in it, which I think are really cool. The second one is actually, there's a trawler called the Seagrass, which has gone out to do the fishing. And basically, Stevie Wayne, who's the DJ who works up at a lighthouse, is sort of giving out the D's. He goes, "Ahoy there to the people of the Seagrass. Please keep an eye out for that fog bank." And of course, one of the sea crew members goes, "You ain't kidding. There's no fog bank." And then the next minute, you cut to a shot through the window, and then the fog bank, he goes, "Hey, there's a fog bank out there." But there's also the wonderful thing is it's kind of like there's moments when it's also the banter between Nancy Loomis and Janet Leigh in there where, as Kathy Williams, she's organizing the big ceremony for the statue, which is to celebrate the 100 years. Essentially, the movie's about a town that's sort of celebrating 100 years and all these people come together. So the wonderful thing about this is it's a very good horror film, but also it has it's probably one of the most funniest things, darkly humorous things anyway.
Thinking about it, thinking about it, it's quite playful, isn't it? In some of the sequences and the way it deals with the horrors.
Even though it's about the fog, I always thought it was a bad name for it. I don't know why I just let it down because it's quite a good film. I thought it could have come, but it's the fog, so it's hard to get round. I don't know what there was no other option. I don't know what the other option is.
But I love it because it's
fog.
it's probably the most beautiful horror film I've seen of recent years. It's there's a wonderful shot where little Ricky, who's the kid who discovers the coin, he sort of travels. He sort of picks up the coin on the thing and it transforms into a piece of wood from the ship, the Elizabeth Dane. And then he's running back along the beach. And then there's a real wonderful shot of the house where they live, where you get the shadow of the clouds going over the top of the thing. And it's a beautiful shot. But Dean Cundey's cinematography is excellent. It really adds to everything in a big way and stuff. So,
right. So what's the next one?
Well, the next one is Psycho 2.
I can remember the first one. I can't remember the sequel.
I have not seen any of the sequels, to be honest. I watched a bit of the series that was on. But,
so Psycho 2 takes place... It's actually a pretty good one. I would highly recommend it.
What year was this made?
This was 1983. So
what was the gap between the two?
22 years.
Yeah, I was going to say. It was
so, in a nutshell, the story is 22 years after he gets incarcerated in the prison, he's released and deemed fit to return to society. Okay, so he basically goes back to the Bates Motel, and people are still somebody is actually out there trying to sort of make him crazy again. And again, there's like nice bits of humor. So, for example, Meg Tilly, who plays Marie, this girl who actually works at this diner, which Anthony Perkins, Norman Bates actually, as part of his rehabilitation, he goes to a local diner and does.
So he's actually trying to rehabilitate.
He's trying to rehabilitate,
and people are trying to make him.
They're leaving notes. Apparently they're leaving notes allegedly from his mother. They leave him at the diner and stuff. But there's an early sequence at the very beginning. He goes, why, listen, I'm okay. I mean, why would they sort of employ me at a diner? Goes, why would they employ a nut to work at a diner? He goes, and then Meg Tilly goes, well, I don't know. It takes a nut to work there. But again, the playful thing about it is it's sort of what makes it actually a really clever sequel is that actually it sort of embraces the fact that we're in a different time compared to Psycho. I mean, Psycho is the granddaddy of all horror films, but it's only based on 3 moments. In the original film, there are dark moments of humor in there. It's like,
the whole thing is ironic. I mean, the whole thing of killing off, spoiler alert, the whole thing of killing off your main character, is a sort of a narrative, meta ironic.
But the thing about the original book of Psycho, again, that's the whole point. Marion Crane is killed early on in the book. And the difference is in the original book, which Robert Bloch wrote, she's not stabbed in the shower simply. She's also decapitated. So in the scene, basically, it goes, it was the knife that a few months later cut off her scream and her head. And that's the actual thing. So but Alfred Hitchcock actually said that it was a black comedy. Psycho was a black comedy because it's dealing with the final sequence. It's when Vera Miles discovers the corpse in the basement, and again she's in the movie in this one because she wants Norman Bates incarcerated, and she turns up at the courtroom to say, "Oh, what about his victims? Can you restore them?" But there's and at the very climax of the film, we sort of discover that there's a lot more to this, that, and in some ways, because you haven't seen it, I'm not going to reveal the spot. No. But all I'll say is to those of you who are out there, you'll know what sequence I'm talking about. The climax, you'll know the very end of the film, and there's a very funny moment in it, and it's a bit of a revelation because you'll understand it. So I'm going to let you do that.
It's the same actor, Norman.
Anthony Perkins.
Okay, right. I might give that a watch.
There's a third film that he directed as well,
which I did see recently, which again is all right. I mean, essentially, it's about a nun played by Diana Scarewood, and of course, he's trying to revive the Psycho, but of course, things get a little bit darker, and he's sort of, again, it sort of goes a bit left with. It's not bad. It's an okay film.
Right. So what's the next one?
Well, I'd actually sort of go on from that. I mean, I'd also like to include Fright Night.
Yeah.
So both versions. Yeah. So there was the Roddy McDowall film in 1985, and there was the Colin Farrell remake recently. So in the 1985 remake, there's a kid who's obsessed with horror films, and a vampire has moved in next door, played by Chris Sarandon. And of course, he gets paranoid about the fact that there's a vampire moving next door, and of course, that he starts witnessing things. You know, the classic thing of things not believing it. So Roddy McDowall is a talk show host, a host of horror films, and he ropes him in to try and seek this vampire. And the playfulness of it is it's kind of playful. Like Roddy McDowall, he goes, would you like an autograph and stuff? He goes, no, I want you to help me kill this vampire. And then of course, Roddy McDowall turns up, and of course, he's sort of bought into the fact that there's a thing. It was written by Tom Holland, who did Child's Play and also wrote Psycho 2. So it was both, these were the films that came out from this. I mean, I think Child's Play can be a comedy as well. That's the other thing as well. I'd also like to mention Day of the Dead. This is the George A. Romero third film.
It's a comment.
There are moments because of the zombie bub who shoots, who basically,
right.
And again, it's the funny thing is about there's a doctor called played by
Joe Carter. Joe Carter.
Well, there's like Richard Liberty is basically what he's doing, and that's the funny thing about it. He's giving these zombies rewards, and it turns out that he's using the guts of like soldiers.
Dead soldiers.
But what I think the great thing is the darkness of the film is actually what I like about that film is the intensity, but there's dark humor at the heart of it. I mean, Dawn of the Dead, for example, is a take on consumerism. I don't rate Dawn of the Dead as much as it, because I think the midsection it just stops dead, and once they're locked in, you can't do anything. Although that said, the remake the remake actually works very, very well. The remake of Dawn of the Dead. So, but yeah, there's other movies. I'm trying to think.
What was the one? The German folktale, like the Grinch. Do you remember?
About the Father Christmas one.
Yeah,
is it Clampett?
Krampus.
Yeah,
that was quite good, because that starts off as an overly family film. Like it's quite jovial.
Yeah.
And the whole way
Troll
through
Hunter. Have you seen Troll Hunter?
Yeah, they're very
Troll
good.
Hunter was pretty good. Yeah, it's surprising.
Well, just to let you know,
Troll Hunter 2, wasn't there?
So I want to sort of shout out about a movie I've just seen recently called Krat. And Krat is an Estonian horror film.
Okay, Krat? How does one spell it?
Krat, Kratt. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, this is the tale.
Is that a name of a monster? Or
it's
something?
the Krat. I'll tell you about it in a minute. It's a movie I've just watched. It's actually quite clever. What it is, it's about a couple of kids called Mia and David who actually are going to they basically are left with their grandmother to work on a farm.
The subtitled
film. And essentially, it's the usual thing. Without your phones, you're dead. Can't do it, okay? So, in the nearby forest, there are environmentalists trying to stop this sacred forest being done. There's a sacred ground where there's a church on there. And basically, they discovered this book in which they can make a Krat. And all a Krat is something that does your work for you.
Right.
Oh, it's like a golem.
It's like a golem. So essentially, they sort of build this thing, and then of course, all hell breaks loose. It's a brand new movie. It's just been released. It's sort of just come out. So that's a recommendation I do. And it's
hang on, is that it? You're going to tell us any more about it?
Yeah, no, I'm just sort of dropping in things.
Honourable mentions.
There are
honourable mentions.
Hang on, but give us something more. The Krat, they make a wish.
It's like a cross between the Tin Man and Forky in Toy Story 4.
Give me nothing there.
You'll understand it. It's a bit. What they do is they're a bit like the A-Team. They take all these homemade things and turn it into this thing that looks like bloody Forky and the bloody Tin Man.
Right. Okay.
Watch it and see.
So what's it out on cinema?
It's on VOD, digital VOD.
Which one? Do you know?
I think it was released on October the 4th.
Krat.
Okay, on Amazon or something.
Krat. Yeah.
Okay. So that was it. So that's what are you going to be doing? What's happening with your Fright Fests?
Well, I did the Fright Fest in 2000. The new one is out in the last week in October.
Oh, okay.
As I say, Fright Fest this year went down really, really well. They had Terrifier 2 as one of the main films, although I didn't see it. Argento had his new film Dark Glasses and stuff like that.
He's still making films.
I was going to say, can't be the same fella. Oh, right.
Yeah,
Wow.
Well,
I don't think he was still alive.
Yeah.
No, he did do. He did come over for the event anyway. But I actually bought a copy of his translated biography, Fear. So it's over at home anyway.
Cool.
But yeah.
I think people should. I was going to say earlier. I think we should buy up a lot of physical entertainment now before it, because I've got a funny feeling in the future. It's like what you're saying about the Heather film. I just worry in the future things are going to start getting edited retrospectively online. You know, things getting taken out. I think we should buy
things
DVD.
disappear. There are lots of films now you can't get, unfortunately. You know what I mean? There's lots of stuff that isn't streaming.
Who took 1984 off the bloody? Was it Amazon? You couldn't get 1984. They took it down. They had to put it back up again. Yeah, they took it off.
Oh, the book.
Yeah. Due to pressure, they had to put it back up.
Okay.
And that just stayed. That was about 5 years ago, and that stayed, didn't they? And they weren't doing it like as a PR stunt.
I know you can't get the Turner Diaries on Amazon. But
What's that? I know the name.
That's the far right handbook. Basically, that's
a Mein Kampf sort of.
Kind of. It's a fictional story, but it's really kind of extreme. And
yeah, but I'd like to talk about these films. I think you never know in the future. I think you should buy physical comedy, physical films.
I think this is what's going to happen. I think, like with, I think physical content, the idea of these collector's editions. If you look at Arrow, for example, their special editions of their classic movies, like Heather's was actually an Arrow release, which has been remastered. I think there's something about, okay, so you can buy something online. I've got stuff on YouTube Movies and Amazon, which I've bought because it's nice, because sometimes those films aren't available physically, and also it depends on the cost of actually releasing them physically. So if you have a rarity of a film, for the more knowledgeable people, it's fine. You have that movie and you want to buy it, you can seek out and buy it. But the majority of people will think, well, look, I've got like $9.99 a month for like Amazon or Netflix or Disney Plus. And what I've noticed now is that sometimes there are films that are appearing on, old films that are appearing on Disney Plus that are, like Disney have got like access to like Warner's and Disney and Fox. And the great thing is there's a lot of these classic films turning up. So there's a back catalogue. I mean, Paramount Plus, for example, Warner's have got their own thing as well. I don't know if Sony or, there's a lot.
I'm surprised they haven't jumped on the bandwagon yet.
Well, I'm sure they will. I think it depends, because reviving these libraries, it sort of keeps these things in visibility and stuff like that. And
what were the old? Do you remember the old? Is it Abbott and Costello? What was it, like Wolfman or?
It was Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman. Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. I haven't seen those movies for a long time, but again, they were they were fun at the time, and like I think Bob Hope did the Ghost Breakers and stuff, which was a forerunner of. I mean, those movies were a forerunner of Ghostbusters, because Ivan Reitman, who sadly died recently. These were kind of like, that's what they were aiming to do with Ghostbusters. They wanted a mix of, they wanted to take, Dan Aykroyd wanted to take the wonders of science and actually include humor and do it in an interesting way that was more contemporary.
I wonder if those Abbott and Costellos, you could watch them now. I think you could. I think it'd be like Laurel and Hardy's.
They're probably still pretty good today.
Probably got them on YouTube, I'd imagine now.
Well, actually, if you want to talk about, let's talk about an obvious choice, and one that I should have brought up.
Go on, we'll end on this.
Carry On Screaming.
Oh yeah, okay. Come on, yeah.
So again, that to me is another wonderful element of it, because I like the fact that there's classic moments in that movie, like for example, Harry H. Corbett and Peter Butterworth, they're coming along, and they're it's done to the tune of
they turn up on the cart with the noise.
Yeah, the and then there's of course there's like Oddbod, and then of course the other classic moment is the other moment is where they're talking about what we've got here, and he goes, so what do you think we got here? He goes, they're sort of writing out things, so he goes, what we got? He goes, well, I think it's foul play. So he writes down foul. He goes, anything else? Well, I think it's the feet. So he puts down feet. He goes, anything distinguishing things? He goes, smell. He goes, what's the verdict? Something horrible. He goes, foul feet, smell something horrible. But there's also that famous moment where Jim Dale turns up and Fenella Fielding's on, and she goes, do you mind if I smoke?
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah, and then of course she starts smoking like that. But there's the other one where when Fenella Field wakes up like Kenneth Williams, he He goes, what time is it? He goes, March. He goes, you weren't supposed to wait me till September. And actually, when he dies at the end, he goes, oh, frying tonight.
Oh, yeah, he drops him in the oil.
But again, the great thing about what made that work, a bit like with Life of Brian, they actually used the original sets from the Hammer films.
Okay.
So for example, on like Carry On Cleo, what Peter Rogers did was they actually used the original abandoned sets from Cleopatra.
Right, just to give it some weight.
Really?
So this is because at the time what happened was Cleopatra was actually going over budget from Fox, and basically they decamped to Rome. So they had all these sets left standing, and then Peter Rogers said, I know what we'll do. We'll do Carry On Cleo. So they actually used those sets.
That's good.
So actually on Life of Brian, they actually used the abandoned sets from Jesus of Nazareth.
Oh, right.
So that's what they did. So it was very clever because Life of Brian was actually not really, Life of Brian, which in a way does have a horror moment, but it's done with humor, which is actually they're all being crucified, but then, they sing always look on the bright side of life. There's the stoning, the stone sequence as well. So
I love that film, but I just, if it wasn't for that bloody alien bit just plonked in there, I just, for the love of God, that doesn't fit. It doesn't work.
But did you know that George Lucas actually asked Terry Jones about it? He goes, how much did it cost you to go? About 15 quid. Because the funny thing, he was so impressed. But again, it's Carry On Screaming, I think for me is, again, it's probably one of the best. It's one of the best carry-ons, but also I think it's the best fusion of, and then of course the, the bit where, I'm trying to remember. Like Daniel Dan, the lavatory man, like Charles Audrey, and then they have the finger like that. But that uses some. That's actually uses like when the finger. John Pertwee's in this as well as the Doctor, and he actually he puts the finger into a into like a regeneration, and the whole thing comes out, and then Oddbot appears. So,
well. What's happening with the next 28 Days film? Is there any movements on this? I've been waiting for years.
I am probably...
Keep an eye on it.
I'm probably not sure of what's going on with... because I'm not a fan of 28 Days, although I did
come on. What didn't you like about it? One of the greatest horror films.
I remember it, but it wasn't. It wasn't my. It's sort of on my back burner anyway.
Right. I don't like fast zombies. I'm a slow zombie man all the way. Yeah.
I'm more modern.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, John, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.